Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to teach you a project in art based on colour and also with a focus on painting, okay, as requested by your teacher. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through how major artists have used colour from about 1860 to up until the present day. I'm going to go through a PowerPoint, which you'll see following on from this video in a few minutes. But also you do need a pen and paper because I'd like you to try and make some notes. So as I talk through the art movements and talk about the artists and about the paintings that you'll see, I'd like you to write down the art movement, write down the date, okay, the key artists that I mention, and also just make a few notes on the type of painting, the style, okay. I'm going to talk about all that as well. Obviously your teacher can pause the video and you can have a class discussion as we go along, so don't feel rushed, okay. You can rewind and pause and play back as many times as you like, okay. So let's get started.
Okay, so we're going to start with the Impressionist art movement, which started around 1860 and carried on into just past the 1900s. Okay, and you can see two paintings there by Claude Monet, who is incredibly famous. A lot of his paintings hang in a special museum in Paris, and they're really, really big, but they're absolutely beautiful. So can you tell me maybe what the word impression means? If you do an impression of somebody, what do you actually do? Yeah, you try and copy their style, copy their personality, maybe copy their accent. So here, what he's done is he's actually copying a landscape. You've got to remember back then that artists didn't have cameras, not like we have at the moment, where we can take a photograph of something and we can take it back to our bedroom or to our classroom, or artists can take them to their art studio and they can spend hours and hours and hours drawing and painting from a particular photograph, because that photograph doesn't change, it stays as it is on our phone or our camera or our iPad or whatever we've taken it with. But if you think about back then, artists actually had to paint from life. So Monet was outside painting these landscapes, and as you can imagine, there might have been a breeze, the sun might have gone in and out of clouds, the light would have changed, he may well have been there at different times during the day. So actually, rather than trying to create a really accurate photographic likeness, he creates an impression of the place, so a mood of the place, the feeling of the place. Okay, so you can see that actually when you look up really close to these paintings, if I zoom in there, look, you can see all of his brush strokes, all the different colours that he's used. Obviously colour was really important in Impressionism, and all the different marks he's made. And from a distance we actually get an image, but actually when you look up really close, it's very, very difficult to identify what that actually is a picture of. So we've got lots of reeds, we've got water lilies on the water, we've got the reflection of the bridge, we've got heavy use of various different shades of greens and blues. It really is very beautiful, but like I said, when you zoom back out again, you can see we've got an impression of the place. So all of those marks from a distance actually start to form an image, whereas when we look up close, we just see lots and lots of paintbrush marks and lots of colour overlapped, and it's not, we're not quite sure what it is. Okay, let's move on then. So what happened after the Impressionists? We've got the post-impressionists, okay, so Van Gogh might be somebody that you are familiar with, and you've probably seen these two paintings already. Okay, so you can see there's a bit of an overlap there. All right, so post-impressionism was just the turn of the century, so just into the 1900s, and probably the most famous one was Vincent van Gogh. So he's well known for this image on the left, which is Starry Night, and his series of sunflower paintings. There's lots of them there, and that's a copy of that one on the right there. So if we look at post-impressionists, we can see that actually it's very similar to the Impressionists. You can still see all the brushstrokes, perhaps a little bit more clearly than you can in Monet's work. It's a little bit more graphic. And you can still see the very thick use of paint and the visible brushstrokes. Vincent van Gogh was actually incredibly poor. He didn't sell a painting until he died. So he used to make his own paints from things that he found within the environment, couldn't really afford any paints, and he certainly couldn't afford any paintbrushes. So he used to make his own mark making tools from reeds and leaves and grasses and things that he would find when he was outside painting. So you can see here that actually the colours really intensified. We've got lots of blues and yellows. Even in the sunflowers, we've got blues and then a kind of slightly turquoisey, sort of very pale mint green. And these two colours are complementary colours, and they actually make the opposite colour stand out and zing that little bit more. Okay, but actually the shapes are much more exaggerated in this art movement. So it's almost like the shapes are simplified a little bit more. Okay, but again, if we zoom in on a section of Starry Night there, and you guys are going to have a go at recreating this in a couple of lessons time, you can see how the paint's applied. Again, we've got very thick brush strokes, or reed strokes, or grass strokes, or stick strokes even, depending on what tools he created. And as you can imagine, the sky probably didn't look quite like that, but each time he went out painting, every single evening would have been different. The stars would have been in a different place, the wind would have been different, the cloud formations would have been different. Okay, so again, we get the impression of this movement in the sky, which is actually really beautiful, and probably one of his most famous paintings. Okay, so we can definitely see a difference between Monet and Van Gogh. We've then got the Fauves. Now the Fauve, that's an interesting word, isn't it? The Fauvism art movement was from 1905 to 08. And again, one of our most famous Fauvists was probably Henri Matisse. Now, Henri Matisse was also incredibly famous for doing some images and some paintings, or weren't paintings actually, they were images from cut paper, because as he got older, he started to lose his eyesight and the use of his hands a little bit more. So he had to find different ways of adapting to create artwork. So again, we've got incredibly exaggerated colours. Okay, we've got a lot more contrast in the colours. So you can see there from the lady with the hat, okay, which again is going to be something that you're going to be basing a lesson on after this one. She's there on the left, and again we've got green in her face, we've got lots of greens and blues, we've got greens in her skin tone, we've got greens in her arm there. As you can see, she's sort of leaning on it looks like she's got hold of a stick, or it could be part of a chair. So the colours were incredibly exaggerated. So you can see, because they're so exaggerated, they're incredibly important. So rather than making things, you know, browns or pale skin tones or whatever, so for example, on the image on the right, we've got the blues actually in the bridges and in the boats, and the really harsh oranges, okay, to really make those objects stand out. So the same with Henri Matisse's Lady in Hat there. We can see that actually those colours are making us notice her face and notice her features in a much more stronger way. So again, if we zoom in on Lady in Hat, we can see the brush strokes. Okay, it almost looks a little bit like he's rushed this painting, really, because the brush strokes are really quite coarse, and the areas of paint, you know, look perhaps maybe not quite so neat and not quite so detailed. But you can see how these art movements influence one another. Okay, so again, we haven't got a photographic replica, we've got a mood of a person, we've got the character of this lady perhaps coming through in the colours that he's used in the face. All right, so that's one that we are going to look at in the future, and we're going to focus on colour mixing when we look at that image in a little bit more detail. Okay, what art movement have we got coming next? Cubism. Now, Cubism was sort of followed on from that one, and again you can probably see the links. We've got very unrealistic colours in the face, okay, very simplified shapes in the face. If we just go back to Lady with Hat, we can see that actually there's not a lot of details in the face there. We haven't got any eyelashes, we've got no freckles, you know, we haven't got individual hairs in the hair, we haven't got the lines within the ear shape, okay, we haven't got the hairs on the eyebrows. So again, you can see the link quite clearly. However, Cubism was a new style of art. So again, they were competing with the camera. They were trying to find different ways of creating artwork. You know, why would you pay somebody hundreds and hundreds of pounds to paint your portrait when actually somebody with a camera can do it incredibly quickly, very accurately, and probably much more cheaper as well. So we've got a series of Picasso's paintings there. So Pablo Picasso is probably one of the most famous Cubist artists. So he was influenced by African masks, and around this time, this is where all the artists were kind of meeting together and meeting one another in Paris. But also they were starting to travel, and they were starting to look at different types of artwork. So Picasso was looking at African masks quite a lot, and you can see that in the kind of distorted and really bold shapes that we've got within those faces. But also they were painting more than one viewpoint of the subject matter, whether that was a person or whether that was an object or whether that was a place or whatever it happened to be, from more than one angle, but on the same piece of paper. So you can see there in all three of those portraits, we've got the nose and the mouth okay, and even the chin taken from the side view. All right, but actually we've got both eyes like we are looking at somebody from the front. So we've got two views there. We've got really simplified shapes. So a lot of people tell me, well, it must be influenced by shapes and cubes. Not necessarily. Okay, but again, that it was part of the style because these basic shapes were found within these masks. And when they were looking at different subject matters like objects and things, then yes, they did simplify the shapes that they saw there. Okay, but again, if we zoom in, we can see the thickness of the paint. We can see the quite coarse, harsh, crude, naive brush strokes, if you like, there. We can see the colour mixing. All right, we can see the pattern used. We can see the harsh black outlines. But again, those basic shapes, those unrealistic colours, we can see the clear links between each art movement as we move through history. Let's have a look what comes after Cubism then. There's lots of other art movements in between all of these guys, but if I was to go through every single one, then one, you'd probably be very bored by now, and two, we'd be here a very long time. Okay, so we're going to look at Surrealism now. This came about just between the two world wars, all right, and it was a man called André Breton, who was a psychologist and also an artist and a writer, who was working with interested in dreams and the imagery that we would see in our dreams. And also he was working with World War I soldiers who were suffering from shell shock, which is a little bit like today's post-traumatic stress disorder. So they were having nightmares and weird visions and things from the horrors of war that they had seen. So he was working and listening to them and sort of trying to understand how our subconscious mind sort of puts really strange images together. Have any of you ever had a dream where, you know, you've seen somebody that you've seen maybe out in the public appears in your dream with something to do with something else that day and some random objects and something that you perhaps saw on TV, and it all kind of comes together in this sort of very unusual sort of series of events in your head. Okay, and surrealism, that's really what it means. It's the opposite of what's real, if you like. So the best way of describing it was an umbrella and a sewing machine on an operating table. So never under any circumstances would you ever walk into a hospital and find a sewing machine and an umbrella on an operating table in a doctor's surgery. Okay, so it's kind of things that you would never ever put together in a million years coming together on a canvas. But actually, they're painted in an incredibly realistic way that we're convinced that those images are real. All right, the talent that these artists had is incredible. Okay, the tone, the accuracy, the detail, and again, colour was really important here. You can see that in both of these paintings by Dali, we've got really beautiful, rich, bold colours. All right, so if we zoom in again just on part of that image, part of it, this is a different one actually because I couldn't show you enough of his paintings, but he also had a thing where he would create these kind of optical illusions. So actually you can see that that's a girl with a hood up and a little boy, okay, looking out to sea, and you can see buildings and sort of shapes in the cliff face, but actually that cliff face is a pair of eyes, and the nose and the mouth is within the girl's silhouette figure at the front. He does a lot of this kind of double imagery, which is really interesting, which again, colour works really well for. So he was a very, very clever painter. All right, so we are going to do a little bit of work with a lesson on surrealism, looking at how we can convincingly make a painting look real, even though the actual subject matter is perhaps not. All right, so let's move on. Now, this is somebody you've probably seen. So Andy Warhol and the pop art movement. So we're moving on to sort of actually the 1950s, and it originated in the UK in the 50s. But because it got really, really big in the 60s in America, everybody thinks it came from America in the 1960s. But perhaps that's when the work was much more popular. So pop art is taken, the phrase pop art comes from, it's nothing to do with pop music. OK, it's nothing to do with Cocoa Pops either, or Pop Tarts, or anything else you associate with the word pop. It comes from the term popular culture, which means everything in the 1960s was becoming artwork. So you can see there we've got an image of Prince, the singer, and we've also got Marilyn Monroe, who was the pin-up girl of the time. She was the beautiful model, she was the actress, she was the lady that they got in to sing Happy Birthday to the President. Okay, she was the lady that everybody wanted to look like. She was incredibly beautiful, had a beautiful figure, you know, was young and had a whole world ahead of her. But also these popular images were things like car brands, were foods people had in the cupboards. Coca-Cola was becoming a really big sort of launch product then, even though that's quite popular now. Still, it was really popular in the 1960s. So it was about everything to do with everyday life, okay, that everybody perhaps engaged with, becoming pieces of artwork. So if you think about what now popular culture would be in 2020 and 2021. We would probably mention the coronavirus and Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, various other sort of celebrity people. We might think about what adverts are on TV, so it might be something to do with technology, mobile phones, that kind of thing. Those really popular sort of adverts and popular people that are in the news or perhaps on our TV and in all the movies and things of the time. Okay, so you can see how important colour is here. Now, particularly pop art was very, very loud in terms of colour and also very flat. We've got really sort of graphic images. So you can see there from Marilyn Monroe's that Andy Warhol had quite a unique style of pop art where he repeated the same image lots and lots of times, but in different colourways, and he used the screen printing process. So he created a series of stencils. So he would have a stencil for her eyeshadow and her lips. He would then have a stencil for the yellow part of her hair, the stencil for all the shadows on her face, a stencil for the background, a stencil for the features, okay, and her lips and her teeth and all that kind of thing, which means he could very quickly recreate images, identical images in lots of different colorways. So color was something that was really, really, really important in the pop art movement. Every single artist used an awful lot of color, but like I said, Andy Warhol is probably the most iconic pop artist of the time. So I figured he was the important one to mention. So as you can see, we're getting nearer to sort of today's dates. So let's have a look what we've got next. Now, in the 1980s and the 1990s, a style called photorealism that came about, and this is where painters are so incredibly talented that actually their paintings look exactly like photographs. Now, this lady, Sarah Graham, you can see lots of her YouTube sort of time-lapse paintings on online, which are fascinating to watch because she literally works massive for quite small objects. Sweets and children's toys seem to be her inspiration. She's inspired by the colour from things in our childhood. And if you think about, sweets and children's toys are much more colourful when we are younger. And also she works in something called macro, which is really enlarging something that's very, very small. So we've got small lollipops here. And again, if you look online, you'll see pictures of rubber ducks and children's toys and fruit salad sweets, those sort of pick and mix bags and things. But she would blow them up, and these canvases might be, a couple of meters wide. So they are actually incredibly large. And like I said, if you watch the YouTube time lapses, they're fascinating. So the focus here, again, is really intense colour, the realism, all the different shades within those lollipops in the wrappers, the reflections. Okay, so all those creases, the white reflections from the light of the cellophane and the plastic. So it's all about using colour to create those really convincing textures. Again, lots and lots of photorealists out there. But again, like I said, if we zoom in on one of her paintings, you can see the richness of all the different types of colours there within each of those sweet wrappers that perhaps we don't really notice. We just open them and shove them in and enjoy them and chew them up and eat more sweets. We don't really appreciate all the different types of colours within the graphics of those sweet wrappers, but they are incredibly intense. Again, she wouldn't be able to create this realism without colour. So colour's been really important throughout our history. Okay, our world will be pretty dull without it. And then I thought I'd show you somebody who's clearly been influenced by art movements that we've already talked about today. So this is a painter called Francois Neely, who's quite contemporary, is still working now. And you can see she's looking at using colour in a really quite abstract way. So similar to the Cubists, we've got quite interesting use of shapes, okay, basic shapes within the tones of the skin. We've got really unrealistic colours like we have in the Phobes. And also in places you can see the brushstrokes, but she uses a palette knife, which is a little bit different to paint with. Which we may explore a little bit more, but we might use something like a glue spreader or something that's a little bit safer than a metal implement and also a bit more accessible. I'm sure you've got some in your classroom. But again, really beautiful colour, the intensity of those faces, even though the colour's unrealistic, the marks that she's made with that palette knife and all those different tones of colour are quite strange. You wouldn't really see them on the face, but again, they work together really well to show us what those people actually look like. We still get quite a real impression of what that person's portrait is. They are quite accurate. And again, if we zoom in, you can see all the lines, the overlapping colours, the lines from that implement that she's used to scrape the paint on and direct it is really, really fascinating. So You may need to rewind the video a few times there to get all the information, okay, so which your teacher can do. She can zoom back and press pause and replay various bits of it. All right, but now I'm going to show you what you're going to do with that in your sketchbook, and we're going to talk about sketchbooks a little bit.
So this is what I would like you to do in your sketchbook. So it's a timeline, okay, of the PowerPoint that we've just gone through. So all of the dates, all of the art movements in the right order throughout history. Okay, you can see that there's an image for each one. I've mentioned the dates, I've mentioned the title, I've mentioned the key artists, and I've got a little sort of paragraph there, or you could do bullet points of the sort of key bits of information that we talked about. I've also made it quite colourful, so I haven't just had a line go straight across my book. Okay, I have taken the timeline for a bit of a wiggly walk, and I've painted it in. So you could colour it in, or you could paint it, or you could use coloured paper. All right. But, you know, sketchbooks are not like normal exercise books. We don't have to put the date at the top. We don't have to underline the title. Things can go anywhere you like. Okay, so you might need to spend a bit of time printing some pictures out now, doing a bit of research on the internet or on your class iPads or whatever it is you guys use. Okay, and then you can make a start on your timeline in your book. Okay, so it'd be lovely if you could send me some pictures as well of what your work looks like when it's done. So that's what mine looks like. Okay, but you can do that any way you like. All right, but a timeline is important because the dates must be in the right order. So as long as you get all the images and the key movements in the right order in terms of the dates, you can have it going across the pages in your sketchbook however you like. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed that lesson. You've learned a lot, and I'll see you next time for some actual practical work, which would be great. Bye.